Hello, everyone, and welcome to Digital Marketing. Hopefully, everyone can see this. Pulling up the channel just to make sure. So today we got a couple of things to talk about, but it's a less busy week than normal. Basically, the interesting thing is that if you've turned in your taxes implementation, which I assume all the groups have, I need to double check to make sure that's true, but I'm pretty sure it is. We're pretty much there, right? That's the good news, right? So hopefully everyone feels that way. That being said, I have turned in, I have turned up all the, turned on, sorry, all of the content for the course at this point. So everything until the end of the semester you should be able to see, and it should be available, right? By the way, just a quick reminder before I dive too much into things. If you're watching live and you want to ask a question, I highly encourage that. That's always good. But make sure and type in your question early on so that I don't accidentally shut the feed down while you're still waiting for the answer to your question. Okay? So let's talk about what's going on. So first of all, tax implementation got turned in. That's good. It's being graded right now. Analytics. The analytics exam should be completely graded. If you have any questions or concerns with it, let me know, right? And we'll try and get to it. The next things we're really document the final presentation and the creative content. So that includes, all of the material on email and mobile marketing, as well as the material on viral video and CRM, right? Finally, there is a couple of practical examples. There's one on AdWords that's up and live now, and then there's a couple of readings that are up there. One for this week that's up there is on Brave content and kind of really creating. I think it's related to the video aspect, so that's why it's up there. It talks about how to create really brave content that really engages users, that really kind of steps outside the normal bounds of what people are looking for in content, or what expecting in content, right? Usually it's hopefully what they're looking for. And then there's one on social CRM and what social CRM means, right? So that's it for what's going on. The only other thing, I haven't had a lot of questions trickle in. I think everyone's kind of settling in after tactics and implementation. But I do want to talk a little bit about the consumer connectivity content and that we didn't that we talked about, and the Facebook privacy readings, because we didn't talk about either of those last week, if I'm remembering correctly. So I'm going to bring those up. We'll start with the not the way I do. Okay, and let me blow this up a little bit so it's easier to read. Okay, there we go. Well, I can add in the window. Window capture. Okay, got it. Go ahead. No, actually, I'm gonna do. Oh, let me do that. Yeah. No, I want window capture. I did that right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. We'll just gotta find Keynote, and we should be good. Okay. So let me turn off my camera and blow this up a little bit to make it bigger for you all. We go all the way back to the first slide too. Okay. So the consumer connectivity paper. This really kind of came out of a paper that I wrote in collaboration with some colleagues a couple of years ago, and it was basically we sat in a room for 3 days. And it was me and a bunch of digital marketing colleagues, and we tried to think of where is the future of digital marketing going, right? And kind of what's the most important aspects of digital marketing for digital marketers to pay attention to, right? So that's kind of the kind of question that we were trying to explore, and we kind of came up with what we called the POP framework. So let me advance that slide. So the POP framework is people, objects, and the physical world, right? And what we kind of meant by that, people is the fact that we're getting increasingly new data about people and consumers, right? the 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 objects, right, are the objects that were that we're interacting with, the new smart IoT devices, the smart home, the smart all the way to smart fridges, from the smart watch to your smart phone, everything like that. Not homes, phone. That's what I meant to say, right? Those are all kind of the examples of the objects that we're talking about. And then the physical environment is the fact that, we now actually know where you are in the real world a lot of times, right? Like we can actually kind of examine where the individual is when they're making these decisions, right? And we think that all these new interactions are really going to cause some new digital marketing questions to appear and some new data potentially to come out of this. And that's going to be a lot of things for digital marketers to pay attention to. And, just to recap, I really think that the Internet of Things, and this is from a reading we did earlier, right, is kind of an important and crucial part of digital marketing. And, we really need to think about the fact that you can't control the IoT. You can merely guide it, because how messages are interacting is very difficult to control. Security is going to continue to be a problem, so keep that in mind as you proceed with digital marketing solutions. Reaching the consumer through IoT requires working with gatekeepers. Now, it's always been the case. Like, you can't just go and put a ad up on Google without talking to Google, right? But now, if I have a Google-enabled phone in a car, right, that's running a social media app, right, like, and you're passing, at my store, and I want to send you a message, who do I talk to? Do I talk to the car? Do I talk to the phone? Do I talk to the car that then talks to the phone for me? Do I talk to the social media app directly, right? Like, how do I process all that? And all of that is going to be held through a series of gatekeepers. And so it's important to kind of think about how you need to start building relationships with those gatekeepers. Finally, that is a complex system. It's a complex place, and we should really try and embrace that complexity and see how we can use it to our advantage rather than fearing it. So I have this question for you, right? Will constant bombardment, right, of the amount of content and the amount of solutions you can get through, say, a smart fridge. Like, if you have a smart fridge, and when you go to your smart fridge, it says, hey, you're out of milk. Do you want me to order new milk for you from Walmart, right? Because it's a Walmart-empowered fridge, right? Or, hey, you're out of PBR. I know it's your favorite brand of beer. I'm going to get the local 7-Eleven to drop some off for you, right? Like, what will that be something that will be embraced by consumers? Or will that be something they'll revolt against? And, it's an interesting discussion. I honestly believe that as long as the solution that you're giving to the consumers is better than the solution they had before, even if that means they have to have some advertising to pay for it, they might grumble about it, but in the long run, they're going to give in, right? That's what we've seen, is that as long as the solution I'm getting is better than whatever solution I had before, it doesn't matter how much advertising is involved, right? The internet itself justifies that, right? Like, we could do without the internet, get rid of all internet ads, right? But the truth of the matter is that the internet empowers so much other stuff that people are willing to put up with it, right? I think there's a bunch of unknowns, though, right? Like, how are consumers going to work with the IoT, right? If I have a smart fridge that has all these great stuff and I never use it, right? If I never interact with it, then it's really kind of a dumb fridge, right? It doesn't really help me at all to advance a marketing agenda, right? And so I'm not sure I'm not convinced yet that consumers are ready to just jump into adopting all smart devices, right? And there could be privacy reactions. Maybe it's okay that my fridge knows that I'm out of Heinz ketchup, but maybe I care about that. Maybe I don't even store it in my fridge, but maybe that's something I'm concerned about, right? And so where are we willing to draw the line? And of course, I think time and time again in this class, we've seen that most consumers are willing to take sacrifices for their privacy if it provides them with something that is of benefit, right? And finally, do we know how all this will actually affect consumer decision making? Like, can we actually increase share of wallet? Can we increase purchases through a smart door in any interesting way? Or is it just a a dead end kind of for digital marketing. And I mean, I think it's gonna be really interesting. So I have these right here. These are, you may recognize them. These are called dash buttons. Amazon makes them, and essentially they're fantastic. They're IoT devices that do one thing: they make purchases for you, right? So if you have the Slim Jim button and you push it, it orders more Slim Jims, right? And if you have the Stacy's Pita Chips button and you push it, it orders more Stacy's Pita Chips, right? It just amazes me that like they're so single purpose and they seem to work pretty well, right? And people seem to be adopting them to some extent, right? I also find it interesting that they're one use, right? They really only have one use. I think what we're probably going to see in the long run is more like the smart automated kitchen where, you have a list of things that are stored in a cabinet, and when you run out of it, you push a button on the front of the cabinet and it orders it, right? Rather than having to have a single button for every single one. Anyways, that's some thoughts on consumer connectivity and the POP framework. If you have any questions or concerns about that reading, let me know. Let me now switch over to the other reading I'm just going to talk about, which is the Facebook privacy reading. And this is particularly timely because I don't know how many of you saw this. You may have been so amazed by my Michigan State Spartans beating the Blue Devils that you didn't actually see this, but it turns out that the Mark Zuckerberg wrote an editorial this weekend, and it was in the Washington Post, and it's an interesting editorial. It basically says that he wants to be regulated, and so he said that there are three things that he thinks that the internet companies are not good at regulating themselves about, and those are privacy considerations, right? Like what data they can and cannot keep about the consumers. The dissemination of violent and, let's put it this way, antagonistic content, right? Content that some people object to in a strenuous way, right? And he also wants to be regulated about political advertising. Now, a lot of political advertising is regulated already, right? Like mainstream political ads. But he wants regulation that would help him to deal with situations like the Internet Research Agency, the Russian trolls, who basically put out ads and content to try and spark up debates, right? Around things like Blue Lives and Black Lives Matter, for instance, right? So that's kind of an example of what he wants to be regulated. And so then the question naturally comes up, why does he want to be regulated, right? And, the less cynical answer is he wants to be regulated because it's the proper thing to do, right? That they should, in fact, be regulated. Another answer might be that he wants to be regulated because he knows that those regulations will apply to all social media companies, and he doesn't like the fact that Facebook keeps getting signaled out as a bad source of content, right? Maybe he wants to be regulated, and this is kind of being very cynical about his views. He wants to be regulated because of the fact that he thinks it might allow Facebook to remain a monopoly, right? So there's been some calls recently to break Facebook up, to maybe split off Instagram and WhatsApp and other aspects. And if Facebook voluntarily agrees to be regulated by the government, maybe that's an argument as to why you don't need to split Facebook up, right? So, it's an interesting editorial, but it actually leads right into our next topic, which is Facebook privacy. Right? So, let me pull up this slide. Let's see. Move that one. Add a new one. Okay, hold on, almost there. There we go. Okay. Okay. So, what did Facebook do? So this is before the editorial, right? Facebook, it turns out, was collecting data from apps that were using some of its tools, right? So this is like social sign-on, things like that, right? And the most troublesome part about it is that potentially Facebook was using apps or using data about like biological data about the individual, like how far they ran and what their heart rates were and stuff like that. and that was never data that the users explicitly gave Facebook permission to look at. Now they gave apps permission, right? So they might have given Strava or something like that permission to do it, and not realize that in the terms of service, right? Strava has something that says they can share that data with Facebook, right? But in some cases, the developers themselves weren't even aware of this. This was what was crazy. And so they were using something like social sign-on for their app, but they weren't aware that Facebook had a bunch of backdoors into the app package whenever you use social sign-on that let them monitor use of the app afterwards. Right? So that was interesting. Right? So what does this have to do with ethics and privacy? Well, consumers were giving consent to use the data to the app, but not necessarily to Facebook. So that seems like an unethical thing to do. Right? Now, Facebook claims, of course, that this is all covered in their terms of service, right? But, you know, it's been shown that reading the terms of service that you interact with on a daily basis would almost take 76 hours. And I believe I read somewhere that if you look at how long it would take to read just once the terms of service of everything you interact with on a yearly basis, it would be 250 hours of reading that you'd have to do, right? So this is, you know, it's impossible to read these contracts to see all the detail that are in them, right? And you know, part of the problem with that is also that the way we handle third-party data in the United States means that if I give permission to a firm to share my data with a third party, I really have almost no guarantee about what that third party can do with it, right? So this seems like a concern. So, but the problem is that Facebook doesn't exist without ads. This gives them data which allows them to make better ads and more click-throughs, which naturally results in more revenue. So there's almost no incentive ever for Facebook to unilaterally stop collecting or sharing this kind of data, right? And so, you know, the basic question is, how do we balance this then with privacy concerns? And I see three ways, right? One is government regulation, right? So this is like the GDPR or the California Consumer Protection Act, which covers these kind of topics and says what you can and cannot do with a user's data, right? There's self-regulation, so Facebook could try and self-regulate, right? And they did this recently. They removed all references to white nationalists from the website. They had actually already removed references to white supremacy, but they left white nationalism alone with the argument that somehow nationalism was a political movement and not white nationalism was a political movement and not a movement based upon hatred in the same way white supremacy was. And finally, we could balance it by just having everyone leave Facebook, right? There's the hashtag delete Facebook movement, right? So those are some of the ways we could balance this out. Now, if you get a chance, I highly recommend comparing and contrasting, I should say contrast, not contract, contrasting Apple's statements on privacy with Facebook's. Apple's is easy to find. You type in Apple privacy, it shows up. Type in Facebook privacy policy, it's a lot harder to find, and you actually have to go through their website to look at it, right? So why is that? And I want you to think a little bit about that. So Apple has a lot more incentive, or has no incentive to violate your privacy, right? And that's because they make almost all their money from devices. They make their money from the phones in your pockets, right? They don't make their money from the services and the content, which is where Facebook makes its money, right? With this showing ads against the content that's being displayed. So it's a very, very different perspective, right? And so that might be why Apple is now trying to use privacy as a differentiator. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because they released a bunch of ads about privacy with their most recent developer conference, right? But then at the same time, they talked about things like a video game environment and a TV environment, which are both ad reliant, right? So, I'm more convinced that someone like Apple can kind of strike a good balance on privacy than Facebook, because Facebook requires ads in order to support its business. But it'll be interesting to see where that goes as Apple moves more and more towards ad-based revenue streams. Okay. So that's my thought about Facebook and privacy. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me see real quick if there's any questions that came up. There weren't any that have been typed in. So basically for the next week, what I want you doing is watching the videos on mobile and mobile advertising and email advertising. I want you to kind of read over the reading on, see this one, I'm trying to get, this is the one on brave content, so read over that reading and keep working on your group projects. And I think that's about it for me tonight. If there's no other questions, I think I'll go ahead and sign off. So good luck, everybody. Take care. Bye.